Everybody knows the item Blade of the Ruined King, but only a few people remember or even know that it was actually the first item Riot ever gave deeper lore to. The proof of that came with Callista's release, when she had a special interaction with the item as soon as you bought it in the shop.
In the end, it was not his blade that stole our lives. The wounds of betrayal never heal.
Back then, Viego, who didn't even have that name yet, or that edgy shirtless emo look, was a noble king who suffered deeply from the grief of losing his wife. And honestly, his story with his beloved was way darker than people remember. When she was resurrected in the blessed waters of the Blessed Isles, she came back as a rotting corpse that only wished to die again. So the Ruined King cast a spell to basically log himself out of the server together with his resurrected queen, so they could stay together in death. But the Blessed Isles had so many insanely dangerous dark magical artifacts stored in one single place that it amplified the king's spell on a massive scale, which in the end resulted in the ruination and the curse that created the Shadow Isles. Of course, that was just one of the early versions of the Ruined King's lore, and it eventually got scrapped over the years. The definitive version we have today is that Viego was a completely spoiled, egocentric royal, neglectant to his own kingdom, and just a massive asshole. And bro, I'm not even exaggerating. There's even that concept thumbnail that was meant for Legends of Runeterra, where one of the artworks shows Viego sitting on the throne in a robe, just casually giving orders to Ledros. It's wild. Either way, that doesn't change the fact that Riot focused heavily on a very specific item, built an insane backstory around it, kept referencing it more and more, and eventually turned it into a playable champion. And I honestly believe the same thing might be happening with other items, like Death's Dance. Death's Dance is usually built for fighter champions, and it has two passive effects. But whatever, I'm not gonna go deep into the game mechanics right now. This item is from Shurima, and there's always been a big question around it, which is the fact that its design strongly resembles a darkened weapon. Back when Nefaria is still being revealed through teasers, a lot of people connected the darkened dagger image with the Death's Dance item. Some believed there was a connection between the two, or that the item itself was actually Neferi. One thing that fueled that theory was that in the past, the item had a lifesteal mechanic similar to a Darken in-game. And if you look at the first versions of the item's icon, it's really obvious how much it gives off that Darkened vibe. The change from the first to the second version removed some of the eyes on the weapon and a few other details. Nowadays, and unfortunately, it's been redesigned again. The eye doesn't even show up anymore, and I think it might not even be an eye at all now. And considering that in my video about the next Wild Rift champions, I showed screenshots from the article where the team that created Zon talks about there being even more Darkened coming. It would have been really cool to see Death's Dance actually turn into one. And even though it stopped being a possibly Darken related item, at least Riot recently kind of made up for it by adding the chained curved blades of Zolani, which is the item called Endless Hunger. Before we keep going, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a member. You'll get access to some really cool perks like picking video topics or getting early access to videos. Hemomancer's Helm. Hemomancer's Helm is one of the most broken prismatic items you can get in Arena, especially with that passive it has around lifesteal and universal vamp. And even though there isn't any actual lore attached to the item, I figured that Hemomancer's Helm must be some kind of ultra powerful artifact from the Crimson Circle, which is basically a cult founded by Vladimir. It's probably something that drastically amplifies a Hemomancer's blood magic power, but it would almost certainly come at a huge price. Maybe it drives them insane or puts them under some kind of twisted influence that spawns a new persona. Think of Simon from Adventure Time turning into the Ice King after using that crown. And bro, it would be insanely cool if one of those emo teens from the Crimson Circle was the one wielding the Hemomancer's Helm. Considering how popular each one of them is, Ophelia would be the most likely choice. Or maybe Edvin, the big buff guy in the group, since he's actually mentioned in the LeBlanc story Everywhere and Everyone. Tear of the Goddess. Tear of the Goddess is that classic mage item for champions who have high mana costs on their abilities, or champions who spam skills a lot. And it's worth saying that it was famous enough to show up in that Warrior cinematic, where we see Ezreal walking into this kind of chamber and straight up doing an Indiana Jones move, pulling it off of a pedestal. Interestingly, it's worth noting that there was this purple effect on the tear while it was sitting there, and the reason was basically that somehow it was suppressing all of those voidlings, who only woke up when Ezreal removed the item. Probably whoever put it there did it to keep those voidlings hibernating, or they put it there with the tear so that any dumb adventurer trying to take it back would die trying. And get this, Tear of the Goddess actually does have lore, where it says the following: few have the fortune to find the tears of the very goddess goddess who created our world, but those who are fortunate enough to acquire a tier of the goddess may enjoy a significant increase in mana points and mana regeneration. I'll admit, the end of that lore bit makes it sound like some Dungeons and Dragons artifact, but the beginning is super curious. We don't actually know for sure who created Runeterra. I mean, Aurelian Sol made the sun of the solar system where Runeterra lives, but we don't know who made the planet Runeterra itself. So there's this idea that a group of celestial beings used the world runes to start creating Runeterra, but for some reason they never finished it, leaving it incomplete, and even leaving the world runes themselves on the planet as tools of creation. So was this goddess one of those celestials? From the way she's talked about in that lore snippet, maybe even their leader or queen. What made her cry? Was she unhappy with the world she was creating or the direction it was taking? Maybe she cried because something happened that stopped creation and forced them to leave. In Soraka's biography, right at the beginning, it says that when time was still young, probably referring to the universe or reality itself, the Celestials were watching over the immature races that existed on Runeterra, and they were worried about them because those creatures were straying wildly, unpredictably, and dangerously from the purpose and design that the higher beings, the Celestials, had made for them, even saying that the guides and destinies woven for them were ignored or misinterpreted by these mortal beings, leading to chaos, uncertainty, and suffering. Maybe that's what made the goddess so sad that she cried. It's also worth pointing out that this item is from Shurima, according to the wiki, but that also makes me think about Zolani and the fact that she was worshipped and revered as a goddess. So did she cry for those thousands of lives lost to war? Lives she couldn't protect? Of course, she didn't make the world itself, but it would be easy enough to tweak the item's lore to reflect that. Riot changes tons of things anyways, so it would be minimal. Jacksho the Protean. This one even has a name and a title. For those who don't know, Jacksho is an item that was released back in Season 13, and it's basically essential for tanky or bruiser type champions who dive into the enemy team in a fight and want to stay alive as long as possible. And bro, I'll tell you, back in the day, this item was absolutely ridiculous. It made a lot of tanks and semi-tanks practically immortal, and even with nerfs and reworks, it's still pretty busted today. But the most curious thing about Jacksho is that it actually had a bit of lore, and also a wild hidden Easter egg. Starting with the lore, here's what it says about the item. He has been called many things: a carapace helm, a second skin, a living tomb. That last bit totally fits with the hardest Easter egg in the game to actually see. Because you don't find it, you activate it. And the conditions aren't clear at all. According to the belief, you have to have a perfect KDA with a big kill streak, basically not dying at all, and then at the end of the match, your champion would die with this message appearing in chat. Jacksho considers player nickname worthy and has absorbed your power. And it's worth pointing out that even though your champion dies, this death doesn't count as a kill in your KDA. Otherwise, a whole lot of people would be complaining. Back then, a lot of players started to think that this was a possible hint that we'd eventually get a new Void champion. And just to be clear, Jacksho is practically a Voidborn. And bro, out of all of the items mentioned so far, Jacksho is one most likely to someday follow in the footsteps of Blade of the Ruined King. But how would an item that's basically a living helm that acts like a deadly trap become a champion? Considering that Jacksho is kind of like a parasite by nature, it would be insane if the character was some sort of support that at the beginning of the game acted like Yumi, which, by the way, is another parasitic character, except she's not fun and it's just straight up annoying. Screw whoever plays that thing. But going back to Jacksho, after it connected, it could grant buffs with its abilities to the ADC and feed off the kills they get together, building itself a body that would be shown on a bar, like Shyvana's transformation meter or Nars. When it filled up, it could detach from the ally, going from being a charming support to a support tank bruiser with a giant body. Absolutely sick. Honestly, the best idea I've ever heard. But it's not gonna happen, because Riot doesn't like support, and will probably never release one this year either. So go ahead and keep crying in bot lane. And there are people who believe that Jacksho in the lore would be perfect for Jax, and that the item was created by Ecathians as a way to use the Void, since on the PBE, its passive was called Ecathian's Resilience. So people think Jax would be the one to extract all the power already absorbed by the item, and with that be able to even stand up to Bel'Veth. But that's just Reddit conspiracy theory talk. Still, it would be sick if Riot made Jax in the lore use Jacksho and give us a new champion that way. Though Jax is so beloved and doesn't deserve an ending like what happened with Xin Zhao or Zahin. Puppeteer. I even talked about this item in a video before. For those who don't know, this is another ultra broken prismatic item in Arena. Basically, every time you land an auto attack on an enemy champion, they get a stack of the passive Pull Their Strings for 15 seconds. And if it reaches 4 stacks, the enemy champion gets berserked, going into a berserk mode just like Renata Glask's ult does to opponents. And then they start beating the hell out of their own teammate. And here's the detail. If their ally is already dead, instead of going berserk, the enemy gets feared, kind of like Fiddlesticks feared. The crazy part about this item is that there was a time when, depending on the champion and if you combined it with another item, you basically auto won the game. Because with a single hit, you could instantly apply all 4 stacks, which automatically triggered berserk on the enemy, or fear if their teammate was already dead. You can see that in gameplay from Telemy, where he made the opponent practically stay in infinite berserk mode by combining the Puppeteer item with Terminus. And remember that game mode back in 2015 called Black Market Brawlers? That's when the Puppeteer item was first released, so it's not originally from Arena. Back then, the item had a completely different effect, but it was just as interesting. It was made for tank supports, and after marking enemy champions with basic attacks, you could pull them 250 units towards you. And I still insist that Riot is absolutely going to create a Puppet Master champion at some point in the future, because it opens up space for new mechanics in the game, and it's an insanely cool theme. Not to mention, most Rioters are straight up anime nerds. They've already admitted that some League champions were inspired by anime characters they liked, so there's no way none of them are fans of characters like Kenkuro or Sasori from Naruto. One of them could literally walk into the office one day and pitch the idea of making a champion inspired by those references, and preferably not making the character revolve around manipulating and forcing enemies to attack each other like puppets. What would be essential is that the Puppet Master champion actually has puppets in their arsenal as a part of their gameplay kit, being able to create combos or swap playstyles depending on the match. I even think Riot could look at mechanics that already exist inside the game and build on top of them for puppet gameplay, like how Orianna has her ball, where with her Q you send it out and reposition it, and then cast other abilities wherever that ball is, or Azir with the sand soldiers he creates using his W. It's also worth remembering that Puppeteer is an item from the Shadow Isles. So yeah, our Puppet Master would probably come from, or at least be connected to, the Shadow Isles, controlling macabre puppets through some kind of spiritual magic, using spectral strings that create a poltergeist effect, making the dolls move as if they were alive. And since Puppeteer was originally developed for tank support champions, maybe the bot lane Widows will finally get something cool from Riot to make up for all of the neglect they suffer. Celestial Body. Even though it's not an item, I think it's still totally worth mentioning. When Riot reworked the rune system and created the trees we have today, there was a specific secondary rune and inspiration called Celestial Body. And if you look at it, it showed a female figure that looked like some kind of celestial entity. What's interesting is that it actually had a bit of lore attached to it. It said, "Great legends never die. They live on in the stars." And the one who supposedly said that was someone named Daphne, the Dreamer. And this was actually shown in-game at the time, even though nowadays you can only really find it archived on the wiki. A lot of people started believing that this Daphne would be a future champion coming from Mount Targon, possibly the aspect of dreams. But here's the detail. When Zoe had that teaser and in-game Easter egg where her sleep bubble would come flying across the map and hit you in Fountain, a bunch of conspiracy theory players remembered Daphne and became even more convinced it was her, but in the end it wasn't. You could argue that Lilia kind of became her spiritual successor, not the aspect of dreams like many people wanted, but still a champion tied to that kind of theme. But yeah, that's basically it. I'll see you guys in the next video.